Welcome to The Den, the Dark Entertainment Network. I'm the Gothic Rose, and you can find me live on TikTok every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and follow along on Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music. And the blog, Welcome to the Podcast, on WordPress. You can also send me a terrifying tale at welcome to the den podcast at gmail.com. But let's get to the terrifying tale of the night. So thank you all for joining me on this TikTok live. We'll be doing some live dives and we'll be talking about the story of Fire in the Sky. This is the Travis Walton story. Now, just a little bit of backstory as to my interest in it. I live in the Pine Bush area of New York, and this is one of the areas of New York with the highest UFO sightings. Like the recorded sightings are just off the hook. So they have the second largest UFO festival in the country right outside of Roswell. And Roswell only had one crash there. Pine Bush has had so many sightings. Oh my goodness. There are so many true stories here, and I will get to so many of them. But this story, Fire in the Sky, about 2 years ago at the Pine Bush UFO Festival, I met Travis Walton briefly at his booth, and he was selling autographed copies of his book. At the time, I did not have the money to buy it, but he was there. Now, I recently became like reacquainted with the story. I refamiliarized myself with the story. So, this is a whole UFO incident and it's based on a real life event. Now, many people believe this is true. There are also many skeptics. So, I would like to know which one you are. So, the fateful day on November 5th, 1975, Travis Walton, who was then 22 years old, and he was working as a logger with his 6 coworkers, they were working the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. So that's pretty close to Roswell, New Mexico. It's in the Southwest. They're not neighbors, but they're not far away. So they were driving home after a long day and they saw a bright light in the sky. And they were curious and they were thinking that it might be a crashed airplane. So they decided to investigate. And what they encountered would change their lives forever. So Travis decided to exit the truck and he wanted to get a closer look at the source of this light. He saw a large metallic disc hovering above the ground. This now described UFO or UAP emitted a high pitched sound, and a beam of light suddenly struck Travis, throwing him several feet into the air. His co workers were terrified and they sped away in the truck, leaving Travis behind. And they reported the police to the incident who were skeptical, but they did launch a search for Travis. But why would you leave your friend there? That's your coworker. You all went to investigate, but they left him in the the forest wherever they were with this UFO in Arizona. Now, he gives a recount, and this has been on TV. He has given several counts of what happened on his time taken aboard this craft. So, what he says is he found himself in a sterile metallic room surrounded by small humanoid beings with large eyes. He panicked and he tried to escape, but he was restrained by the beings and they performed various medical procedures on him, which he described as both painful and frightening. And Travis eventually lost consciousness. So 5 days later, Travis was found on the outskirts of Heber, Arizona. He was disoriented, he was dehydrated, and he had no memory of where he had been or what had happened during those 5 days. His story was, of course, met with skepticism by authorities, but his coworkers all passed polygraph tests confirming their version of events. And then media attention brought this story to the national spotlight. And I believe that the reason that there's skepticism is because they gave these guys polygraph tests to see if they had unalived Travis Walton, and then all went to the police to try to cover their story. And that makes sense because this was 1975. There were not cameras out in the middle of nowhere. There were no recordings. There was nothing like that. It was such a different world 50 years ago. So the Travis Walton UFO incident sparked widespread debate and controversy. Skeptics argue that it was a hoax or a case of mass hysteria, while others believed it to be genuine evidence of extraterrestrial contact. The incident inspired the 1993 movie Fire in the Sky, which dramatized Travis's experience. Travis has continued to stand by his story, and the incident remains one of the most well documented UFO encounters in history. So, is this something that you all believe or don't believe? Because this is quite a story. I mean, he was missing for 5 days and he found a phone booth. So, if you guys don't know what a phone booth is, I don't know, maybe you do. Back in the day, that's how you made a phone call, either with a dime in the 70s, a quarter in the late 80s, and you could make a collect call as well, which meant that you just picked up the phone and dialed the operator, gave them the number and your name, and someone would accept that phone call and accept the charges of that phone call to their home phone. And that's how we got away with not paying for phone calls or if we didn't have any change. So he made this phone call and it sounded like him, but no one believed really it was him at first because he was missing for 5 days and Travis didn't know he was missing for 5 days. So this is just a fascinating subject. I mean, the question is, and people who have experienced UFOs, even just seeing things in the sky sometimes, are definitely believers. But people who have not experienced anything can still be skeptical. You can still, I think, be a believer if you've never experienced something. But many people, especially in the Pine Bush area, have absolutely experienced something, whether it was a close encounter of the third kind or the first kind, which is just seeing the craft. And seeing the craft, especially with the drones that have just been out there, I can understand not believing maybe everything in the sky is a UFO or UAP. I can see skepticism still there. But if you actually see a craft like Travis Walton said he did in front of him with a beam of light that took him up onto the craft, that would turn a skeptic into a believer. I'm sure they weren't thinking that night, these men driving home, what they were going to see in the sky was, a flying disc, a flying object that may not have been from this earth. Now, I know that there was an account that he had of what happened on this UFO. So I am going to do a live dive and check this out. So let's see. Travis Walton, what happened on the UFO. Let's see what the live dive gives us for that information. So, let's see. I'm just seeing if there's more, because that's exactly what I just told you, and I don't want to repeat that. So, this is what we're going to do. Okay, let's get a little bit deeper into the deep dive of what happened to Travis Walton. So, after being struck by the beam of light and losing consciousness, Travis Walton woke up on what he described as a table in a sterile metallic room. The room was dimly lit, and he initially thought he was in a hospital. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he saw 3 humanoid beings standing around him. The beings were short, around 4 to 5 feet tall, with large heads and large almond-shaped eyes. Their skin was pale, and they had small, delicate features. Now, this is what's been described as the typical Greys. So Walton described feeling intense fear and confusion. He tried to fight off the beings, but found himself weak and unable to move much. The beings seemed to be performing various medical procedures on him using instruments he couldn't recognize. He described feeling a mixture of pain and numbness during these procedures. This is quite a tale, because he got back to Earth on his own. He escaped. So, in his panic, Walton managed to get off the table and found a door leading out of the room. He stumbled down a narrow corridor and entered another room where he encountered a taller, more human like being wearing a helmet. This being led Walton to another room that resembled an aircraft hangar where he saw several disc-shaped craft. In the hangar, Walton encountered more human-like beings who didn't speak but communicated with him telepathically. They reassured him and escorted him to a room with a reclining chair. Once seated, they placed a mask over his face and he lost consciousness. When Walton woke up outside Herbert, Arizona, feeling disoriented and dehydrated, he made his way to a nearby phone booth, like I said, and contacted his brother, who, along with other family members and friends, came to pick him up. Walton had discovered he had been missing for 5 days, during which there was an intense search and he had no idea. So they took this very seriously, the police. They really conducted a really intense search for him, because these men who worked with him and saw what happened all passed their polygraph tests. So the incident sparked widespread media attention and an investigation. Walton and his co-workers underwent polygraph tests, which they passed, supporting their account of the events. And again, this is one of the most well-documented and, of course, controversial UFO encounters. And Walton, like I said, stands by his experience. So I would like to know, any of you out there, have you had an encounter like this? Missing hours, missing days. I mean, this one was in the news. I haven't heard of anyone missing for days recently and saying that they were on a UFO. Not in 50 years. And there's been other instances prior to this, so we'll get to those too, because these are fantastic stories to talk about, because it opens your mind so much up to other realms, other worlds. What else is out there besides us humans on Earth? And why are they here? What are they doing? Everyone describes medical experiments, sterile rooms. I would like to know what you think, if this is true, if you believe this, or even if you don't believe this. Give me your opinion. What do you think these abductions are? What do you think they're about? What do you think the sterile rooms are about? What do you think the medical is about? What do you think they're doing? Manipulating DNA, making hybrids, making the human race smarter, more peaceful. That would be nice. I just don't know. Because Travis Walton came back dehydrated and disoriented, but he didn't have superpowers like Superman or Spider-Man or the Flash. He just came back a regular person. He had an aura about him when I met him. He had an energy about him that, I don't know, to me it just seemed like there was a wall between him and the rest of us, and maybe that's just because he knows he had a very intense experience that no one else around him has had. But I still don't understand the purpose. Like, when trying to think of what is the purpose of these abductions, these UFO abductions, ET, alien, whatever you want to call them, if you don't come back with some sort of superpower, if you don't come back with the ability to help change the world for the better, I'm just confused as to what these abductions are about. Which is why, yes, if you have one and experience them, they are very believable. But if you don't and you think about it in that way, it is easy to be a skeptic. Now, I said once I've hit 10K here on TikTok, I will tell you my personal story, my UFO, UAP, ET story. I will tell it to you here live on TikTok, which I have a feeling is going to be saved. That is great news for freedom of speech and 170 million Americans. But I will tell you my story, and you can tell me if you believe it or not. And even if you don't believe it, as long as you're like kind about disagreeing with me, I'm fine with that, because I understand, even reading this story of Travis Walton and having met him and knowing that for 50 years he has stood by this story and they all passed polygraph tests, these men. This story is true, but it still can be that they all made it up. And that's why they all passed the polygraph test, because they all had the same version of the story that they made up. You know? It just strikes me as odd, but not 100% untrue, because we know about the Roswell crash and we know about Betty and Barney Hill, and there are so many stories here, and I have pictures of craft over my own house. And like I said, I have a story. So I want to know what all of you think of this. Do you believe Travis Walton's story? Have you read his book? Have you seen the movie Fire in the Sky? Let me know what you think. Drop a comment, follow along, subscribe, all that great stuff. I appreciate all of you so much who have joined me here in the den for this live on TikTok. I am the Gothic Rose, and I will see you on the next episode.